Like and subscribe right now, or this spider will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. Don't commit a crime if you can't do the time. That's what they say, right? Well, it seems that some of the convicts never think of the consequences beforehand. We know it's difficult to keep up your emotions, especially when the sentence is life imprisonment. But I bet you weren't expecting these reactions. Here's how convicts reacted after hearing their sentences. Number 1. Antonio Barbeau. What do you think would have driven these teens to end the life of their old great-grandmother? Antonio Barbeau was just 13 years old when he and his friend Nathan Pape went to his great-grandmother's house and bludgeoned the old woman to her demise using a hammer and a hatchet, then stole her purse. Was it about money in the purse? Well, we don't know that yet. But the way he acts after he's charged clearly tells us that he regrets everything. The two were charged with first-degree murder, intentional homicide, for which Barbeau pleaded guilty by reason of mental disease or deficit. According to the psychiatrist who testified, Barbeau has cognitive issues stemming from being struck by a car when he was just 10 years old, which possibly affected his behavior. The latter changed his plea to no contest, but this didn't change his sentence of life in prison with eligibility for parole in 36 years. He was so remorseful that he couldn't get through his statement in court. I think that apology didn't touch the judge, since he'll be getting his parole in 2048. Number 2. Jaleel Hoskins. While Barbeau was remorseful for what he did, Jaleel Hoskins had no feelings whatsoever. 2 months after his wife Maze went missing, Hoskins pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the death of the mother of 5. He was sentenced in Kent County Circuit Court to 50 to 100 years, and again to 12 to 50 years in prison for tampering with evidence. However, just because you plead guilty doesn't mean you'll accept the sentence. As soon as the judge finished talking, he threw over a podium that was standing in front of the judge and yelled at the family of the victim before officers had to restrain him. 2 more officers came up to help the officer take him out of the courtroom. While all of this is happening, a fight broke out between the family of the victim and his family. It seems that even without his presence, trouble never leaves Hoskins. Number 3. David Moses. He didn't cause a tantrum or anything, but his reaction didn't impose a slight feeling of remorse. Moses was 17 years old when he and his sisters, Angelique Nash and Catilia Nash, entered the home of an 81-year-old woman to burglarize it. They weren't expecting anybody home, so when Moses saw the old woman, he hit her to her demise. She had a broken nose, missing teeth, cuts to her mouth, and black eyes by the time her body became lifeless. Such a violent act on a frail woman, don't you think? He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I don't think we're wondering why a judge would give a sentence to a 17-year-old. If you were the judge, you would do the same thing. During the sentence, David looked bored and even appeared to fall asleep twice. Yeah, he did just that. The audacity. Number 4. Jacob Matt Morgan. Unlike the other stories, this one is quite sad, and the boy's reaction says it all. When Jacob was 17 years old, he was accused of intentionally setting a fire that took the life of his 14-month-old brother. The parents had left the baby under the care of his autistic brother, something they lived to regret, as it wasn't a wise thing to do. Prosecutors claimed that Morgan had a fascination with fire, which made him start the blaze on purpose. They went ahead and claimed that he waited outside the home and watched the house as it burned, not calling for help or saving his young brother. This is absurd. I mean, what can an autistic boy do to save the day? He pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and child endangerment and received a 15-year prison sentence. How he cries and prays during his sentence is no doubt very emotional. Morgan is the only one who knows whether he truly intended to kill his brother. What do you think? Number 5. Diana Lovejoy. For someone with both love and joy in their name, she surely didn't expect to find herself in such a situation. Diana was married to Greg Mulville for 7 years, and after so many miscarriages, they finally had a lovely boy. But as it's common in such cases, By the time they were having the boy, the marriage was on the verge of being broken. They got a divorce, and Diana got full custody of the boy. All hell broke loose when Greg applied for joint custody of his son. In court, she claimed that Greg sexually and physically abused her son, which, upon investigation, was found to be false accusations. Joint custody was granted, and she had to pay $100 monthly for child support. Not being able to deal with that, she planned to finish him off, which became a plan gone wrong. She was accused of a failed murder attempt and sentenced to 26 years in prison. I bet she wasn't expecting that outcome. She fainted during the verdict, and her last taste of fresh air was a ride to the hospital. Number 6. Fernando Salgado. It always takes the last verdict for someone to realize that life as they know it will never be the same again. As for Fernando, he couldn't believe that he was going to prison. Fernando Salgado was 18 years old when he was arraigned on 2 sexual assault charges relating to separate classroom incidents. He pleaded guilty to felony assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of attempted sexual assault with a foreign object. He went ahead and testified against his 27-year-old masonry teacher, Emmanuel de la Rosa, in exchange for the court dismissing the sexual assault charge. He was waiting to go home when the verdict said he would be put on probation for 3 years and serve 180 days in jail on weekends. He broke down in tears as he was being led away and resisted going back to jail until his hearing. He was taken away kicking and screaming in full view of his distraught family. Maybe he should have thought of the consequences before doing what he did. Number 7. Ryan Stone. The guy who wrote the dictionary mustn't have met Ryan Stone by the time he was writing it. Otherwise, he would have wasted his ink writing the meaning of two-faced. Instead, he would have written Ryan Stone's name just beside the word. He was arrested for kidnapping and carjacking. Ryan Stone had stolen a car with a 4-year-old inside and taken the police on a wild hour-long chase. During the 60-mile chase across the metro area, the driver hit a half-dozen vehicles and then hit a Colorado state trooper who was outside his car deploying stop sticks in the road. Ryan Stone's family claimed that he was a compassionate person who felt remorse for his actions. Could a man who involves a 4-year-old child in a wild chase be compassionate? Well, the recordings of a conversation were played during his sentencing and showed him bragging about making international news and belittling the victims in his case. Stone was sentenced to 160 years in prison, and he'll likely become eligible for parole after 75 years. I hope you didn't believe the crocodile tears he shed in order to clear his name. Number 8. Dexter Johnson. I bet Dexter Johnson wasn't expecting to get a death sentence when he stood in court to hear his case. Johnson and 4 other teens carjacked and robbed the couple, Maria Aparis and Hoy Na, while they sat in her car outside Na's house. They then took them to a secluded area, where Johnson sexually assaulted Maria before he and one of his friends shot them. It's claimed that the crime took place during a 25-day crime spree, during which 5 other people lost their lives in the robberies. As he heard his sentence, Johnson's eyes filled with tears. He threw a chair out of range, but the officers quickly took charge and led him out of the room. His family members caused a tantrum, while some collapsed, begging the judge to withdraw his sentence. Lucky for him, his execution was canceled, as he was considered to be intellectually disabled, making him ineligible for the death penalty. Could this have somehow been a show to avoid his hard sentence? Number 9. Ricky Hand. Ricky Hand clearly went overboard with this. You gave me 40 years? Well, guess what? Nobody was expecting this at all. We've seen people throw chairs, jump on the judge's podium, or even curse the judge. But throwing feces? Oh, that's disgusting. The feces hit his defense lawyer. If I were the lawyer, he would have kissed his case goodbye. He later admitted to hiding several bottles of his own urine and feces on his body. I wonder how the officers didn't notice he was armed with bottles. Ricky was on trial for a series of robberies across Springfield. He pleaded guilty to only 7 of the original charges in Clark County Common Pleas Court. Next time we see a convict carrying bottles, we know exactly what he might be planning. Number 10. TJ Lane. When they talk about psychopaths, they're probably referring to TJ Lane. It wasn't until it was too late that they noticed that TJ was an unhappy child. He always seemed like a nice kid, but that wasn't the case. Maybe if they'd noticed his Facebook post 2 months before he committed the crime, they would have done something about it. That day, TJ wore a sweatshirt printed with the cruel word killer before attacking the students. He intended to finish off someone he thought was a romantic rival, but in the end, he ended the lives of 3 students and wounded another 3. During his sentencing, TJ didn't show any remorse whatsoever. He wore a white t-shirt with the same printing he wore when committing his crime. When the females described him as an animal and monster, he gave the victim's family the middle finger and left. Crazy, right? Yeah, you can say that again. He received 3 life-term sentences in prison with no chance of parole. He deserves all that and more for the pain he put those families through. Until next time, adios.